Oh, I know too. Yeah. Just take everything in that you're gonna want. I better fix that later. We're gonna fix it. Yeah, y'all still have any furniture?
Exactly. 3 to 9.
Okay.
3 to 9.
I used to work at TC.
Welcome to the Rotary Club of LaGrange. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation today given by Leon Child. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We bow our heads. Oh, Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us all together as fellow Rotarians, as fellow brothers, as fellow brothers and sisters. Lord, we thank you for the mighty work that each and every last one of these members in this room does for their community and for society. We thank you for the servant's heart that you gave each and every last one of these members and this organization. Lord, we just want to say thank you. Thank you for all the many, many blessings that you bestowed upon our lives, Lord. Please keep a great spirit in all of us to do the right thing. Please give us a great, great calling on our lives to change someone else's lives, Lord, through our own mutual benefit and self, but also through as being fellow Rotarians. In your mighty, mighty name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Leon. Now I'm going to ask Scott Lang to come introduce our visitors again. Thank you. Good Wednesday afternoon, everybody. We have several guests and important people. When I call your name, please stand and we'll recognize you. First off, as a guest, Susan Ferguson. We have Daniel Evans from the LaGrange LU. Michelle Bedingfield has a guest, Josh Smallwood here. Henry Jacobs has a couple of guests, and he certainly will introduce our speaker for today too. Guests are Jason Wilson and Juliet Cohen, and he'll be introducing Chris Penn. And then finally, Kelsey Henderson is a friend and guest and my helper. So thank you to everybody. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. It's good to see everybody here today. We don't have any birthdays or club anniversaries, but Raylene and Gary Carter are celebrating 24 years of marriage on the 23rd, so next week. So congratulations to Raylene. A few club announcements before we go forward. Just please be reminded to silence your cell phones. And if you did not talk to Barbara when you came in today or while you were eating, get with her to let her know if you'll be attending the banquet on June 9th at the LaGrange College in the West Side Building. And also, anybody that has not read taken books and delivered books to the pre-K students. If you still need to do that, do it this week, you know, I mean, it is, those kids, I did it this morning, and they were chomping at the bit for some time, so, it was a great way to start the day, though. And then I did want to follow up on an announcement or request that I had last week. Jeff Wright has agreed to continue as our bulletin editor, and I think we can all agree that he's been doing a fantastic job, and we're just glad that he can continue that. It's a lot of work, and Jeff's been doing a great job. And just a reminder that we do have a board meeting immediately following this meeting next door. So if you need to be there for that, or you need makeup, you can come next door for that. Happy Dollars, if anybody has any Happy Dollars, anything to announce or share with the club today, come on up.
Good afternoon. It is the end of the school year, but that's not what I'm happy about. It's been a great year, and really in Lafayette, our school year continues to go this summer. We have about 400 kids on campus all summer also. But I just wanted to thank the Rotary Club. You guys contributed $52,600 to the scholarship fund at Lafayette Christian School through the Gold Tax Credit Program. So that is just absolutely phenomenal. Instead of tax dollars going to Atlanta, we were able to stay local here in our community and be used to help kids. And just for accountability's sake of how that's used, we had over $200,000 of gold tax credits, and we helped 97 students. 51 of those students had an average annual adjusted gross income of $24,000 a year. So we're thrilled to be able to do that. Construction is going well. Also, it's really just now getting underway for the Merit League and the Inclusive Playground that's going up in the community, and so we're excited about that too. So thank you very much for doing it.
A happy dollar for my daughter who graduates tomorrow evening.
I have a happy dollar for the Dragon Boat Race. Registration has closed, so we have officially 23 teams that will be competing this year. So mark your calendar for July 16th. Mike Patton is our premier sponsor again this year, so we're excited to have him out there. We do still have some sponsorship opportunities available, so if you or your business would like to be a sponsor, that registration is not closed, but the teams are out there, so we'll see y'all on the 16th.
Thanks, y'all. And now I'll ask Henry to come introduce our program.
Right, I'm glad to introduce my friend and colleague, Chris Manganella. And you know, I'll share a little bit about him, but for one, we both work for Chattahoochee Riverkeeper, and so, you know, I work here in the community, the Grange, kind of the middle Chattahoochee region. But I feel like this is a great opportunity to kind of highlight the work our organization does, not just here in the local community, but throughout the region. And so I'm excited for Chris to kind of share with y'all more of kind of a big picture look at what's happening, you know, on the Chattahoochee River, but also just kind of, you know, water in general here in Georgia. And also, you know, not just today and tomorrow, but what the many years ahead kind of looks like. And y'all, you know, I will also get to share my spiel with y'all later. I think in August I've scheduled myself. So don't worry. But Chris is Chattahoochee Riverkeeper's Water Policy Director. He leads our water supply program, tracks regional water planning, and works on legislative initiatives to ensure there's enough clean water for communities, environments, and economies facing a changing climate. Since 2010, Chris has provided strategic policy analysis and direction for the Georgia Water Coalition. Chris has written extensively on natural resource topics, including energy, water, agriculture, and wildlife. He wrote a book, Southern Water, Southern Power, how the politics of cheap energy and water scarcity shaped the region, and was co-editor of Environmental History in the American South. He has published in Environmental History, the Journal of the History of Biology, the Journal of Southern History and Southern Cultures. And additionally, Chris has written and served as a subject matter expert for the Washington Post, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution Radio, and other media outlets. So Chris, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Henry, for setting this up. I am Chris Manganella. I'm Chattahoochee River's Water Policy Director, and I'll say it right off. I got into this as somebody who was interested in the humanities and history. So that's how I ended up in the policy world. So I'm not a lawyer by training. I didn't go to school for public policy. It was just something that I've always been kind of interested in politics and policy, administration and whatnot. And so that's how I got into this. And so just kind of, I always say that when I start to talk about things like the water wars, which I won't be talking about today, but I haven't answered any questions about them once we get through. But so anyway, what I want to talk about today is just the kind of challenges and opportunities in the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint River Basin. We also call the ACF. So next slide, please. Just real quick, I know as Henry said, he's going to give you kind of more of a talk about Chattahoochee River, who we are, what we do. Basically, as an organization, we were founded in 1994, 11 licensed waterkeeper. That's a kind of a large coalition of waterkeepers all over the world, over 300 of them. We've got about 10,000 members of Chattahoochee Riverkeeper with offices up in Gainesville, up near Lake Lanier, in Atlanta, and then also obviously down here at the Grange. We are a nonprofit with kind of a variety of programs. On the left here, a good picture is our neighborhood water watch program. We've got a bunch of volunteers that go out, collect water samples on a weekly basis. They bring them into our lab. We can test them for real basic stuff like bacteria. Because we've been collecting data for a long time, so if the bacteria hit very high levels of bacteria, we can go out into the stream and actually walk it and find something like you see here, which is a broken sewer line. Sewer lines across rivers, creeks, trees fall over, pipes get broken, floods and whatnot, and that's usually why these things crack. So we usually find about a dozen or so of these sewer line breaks on a regular basis, or annually, I should say. In the middle there is a picture of our education program. We take kids out on West Point Lake as well as Lake Lanier on large pontoon boats. I just happened to be out this morning with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders from Chambers County, Alabama on West Point on our pontoon boat with Sally. We do kind of basic water quality education, kind of tell them what happens when the rain hits the land and then what happens when the water from the land gets into the lake. And so that education program is operating in both Lake Lanier and West Point, and a few thousand students through that program annually as well. On the far right, that is a picture of me doing advocacy. We have an advocacy program. We work down in the General Assembly in Georgia, trying to get good bills through and hopefully fix the ones we don't think are so good. So we spend a lot of time with legislators educating them on water issues in Georgia and the Chattahoochee River Basin. That's where we do a lot of work alongside another coalition called the Georgia Water Coalition. We also, once a bill becomes law, then an agency has to figure out how to implement it. We also are engaged in like the Department of Natural Resources, trying to help provide input on what we call stakeholder process on rulemaking and whatnot. And then the final piece is kind of brings us back to this first picture. Like when we see a broken pipe, which that's not allowed, we pick up the phone and call the jurisdiction and say, pipe, and they go out and they fix it, and then everything's better. And so we just kind of work kind of throughout that whole system of the laws and enforcement and whatnot. So why do we do what we do with the Chattahoochee River? We do it ultimately for the sustainability of the river's future, and for that long run. The Chattahoochee River is a part of this kind of map here shows the three big river basins that we call the ACF. Chattahoochee is in the blue, the Flint River is in the brown. Those two rivers come together at the Florida-Georgia state line, and form the Apalachicola River, which flows through Florida into eventually the Gulf of Mexico. So the work we do in the Chattahoochee River, specifically in that blue area, there are over 5 million people that live in the Chattahoochee River Basin. Between Helen all the way up to Blue Ridge, all the way down to the Lake Seminole there on the Florida state line. There are over 100 wastewater treatment plants. There are 11 dams. Many of them still produce electricity. There are natural gas, coal-fired, or nuclear power plants. It's very important to know when you turn on the lights, you're using water, so we need water to generate electricity anywhere in the United States, and certainly in the Chattahoochee River as well. Solar power may change that, it is already changing that. But nonetheless, we need water not just for wastewater treatment, but also for energy generation. And then the further down the river basin we get in both the Chattahoochee and the Flint, agriculture is really considered one of the largest industries in the state of Georgia. That kind of lower part of the Flint River and the Chattahoochee River is the breadbasket of Georgia, if you will. And then finally, there's recreation. We do what we do to make sure there's enough water, not just for all the people and the communities that need water, but also for recreation as well as things like cold water trout, and shoal bass, and other aquatic organisms. So anyway, the Chattahoochee River, it's got a lot to do for a lot of different people in a lot of different communities. We also do what we do because we're dealing with climate change, right? We have a new normal. We have this kind of weather whiplash between extremes, breaking new records, whether or not it's temperature or precipitation. These are things that are real, and we're having to think about how we're going to manage the limited resource that is the Chattahoochee River for the future. So next, please. In terms of these examples, folks may remember in 2007-8, that was really the worst drought the Chattahoochee River Basin has seen. This is a picture on the left of Lake Lanier. The lake was drawn down very low. Those docks and boathouses were getting pushed further and further from the shoreline. And there's similar things happening here in West Point that has happened in previous and also successive droughts. But this kind of new normal we're dealing with, this whiplash, is that in 2007 and 8, we had this crazy drought and limited water resource. And then in 2009, we had record flooding. This is a picture of Six Flags in Douglas County, just south of I-20, adjacent to the Chattahoochee River flooding, right? So we're dealing with these extremes, with new records, and this that we call weather whiplash. And again, this is why we do what we do, make sure there's enough water in the river basin for all the folks and the different people who need it. Let's see, next. We also do what we do because water is something that is inherently there is conflict over. And you don't have to worry about reading all this stuff. I'm just going to have it up there to help me with some guide rails. But the water wars, for folks that have lived in Georgia for a long time, the water wars have been something that have been effectively underway since the 1990s. Georgia, Alabama, and Florida have argued over how much water each state should get, when they should get it. And this has been something that has, again, been going on since 1990. There was a brief period in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the 3 states thought they might get together and form kind of an agreement on how they would share the water in the 3 states. That ultimately failed, and that set up kind of a succession of court cases that culminated in 2013 and 2021. Florida, after suffering the drought of 2008 and then 2012, was very hard on the oyster and fisheries industry in Florida. It's important to think in order to understand that fresh water that flows from the Chattahoochee and the Flint into the Apalachicola, that fresh water flowing into the Gulf of Mexico is really important for the fisheries in that part of the world. The drought reduced that flow. The fisheries crashed. There was some over harvesting of oysters. And in 2013, Florida thought that the only way to resolve the water woes that they were dealing with was to go to the U.S. Supreme Court when 2 states are, or when 1 state is going to try to sue another state, you have to go through the Supreme Court to do that. That case went on until 2021. Ultimately, the Supreme Court said that Florida was unable to prove that Georgia was responsible for reduced river flows in the state of Florida, right? So the Supreme Court said, Florida, you know, we understand that your fishery crashed, we understand that there was less water flowing in Florida, but you can't prove Georgia was responsible. So that was the kind of, you know, the Supreme Court just kind of pushed Florida's case aside and said, the case is over. Nonetheless, in the actual Supreme Court opinion, the justices acknowledged that, you know, these reduced flows of water were in some way were the result of climatic changes. So here in the Supreme Court opinion, we've got the justices talking about climate change. But perhaps the more important statement that I saw in this opinion was this last one, which is that Georgia has an obligation to make reasonable use of their waters into the future, and to conserve those waters. And again, this is a big statement. The way I and others have interpreted this is to say, you know, Georgia did a great job, has done a great job conserving water, both in municipal and agricultural contexts, but needs to keep doing it in the future. Just because this case is over, Georgia has an obligation to keep doing all the good things that it has done. And it's almost like the court was waving a finger and saying, because if you don't, you might not win the next court case. So Georgia has that obligation to keep doing what it's doing in terms of advancing new practices and whatnot. And the next slide, and one of the reasons is this is a pie chart of, you know, data that said, you know, by 2050, all of Georgia would need about 5 billion gallons of water a day. Like the whole state, all sectors, everywhere would need about 5 billion gallons a day by 2050. That's again for drinking water, commerce, industry, agriculture, and energy. It's a lot of water, but 4.6 billion gallons a day. The four pieces of the pie that I grouped together and pulled out on the right side there are important for a few different reasons. First of all, that kind of section, those four pieces of the pie, that includes metropolitan Atlanta, again, one of the largest populated, 10 million people in Georgia. There are, just in metropolitan Atlanta alone, about 6 million people living there. But these pieces of the pie don't just include Atlanta, it also includes that agricultural breadbasket that I talked about. Second of all, aside from population and agriculture, these four pieces of the pie, that's about 45% of that 4.9 billion, right? So again, thinking about like why do we have to think about how much water we're using to feed the Chattahoochee and the Flint River Basin, is that almost 45% of the water the state thinks we need is going to have to come from the Apalachicola and the Chattahoochee Flint River Basin. So again, in the context of the Supreme Court saying you have an obligation to think about what's going to happen next, this is one of the reasons why we have to think about how we're going to use water, because of how much we're going to be thinking about. So that's what happens, kind of what happens next matters. Next. So Chattahoochee Riverkeeper has thought for a long time that there is an alternative to legal battles, kind of this water wars in the legal battles. And so one of those is an alternative to lawyers, and a possible new opportunity is an organization called the ACF Stakeholders. The ACF Stakeholders is a nonprofit. It's been around since 2009, and the goal was to bring all the different stakeholders who live in the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint River Basin together and try to come up with some sort of solution to the water wars outside of the courtroom. It's involved again, farmers, county commissioners, local water utilities, conservation groups like ours, power companies from all three states, representatives from these different industrial sectors, and all came together in 2009, started meeting, and trying to come up with this solution. And so through a consensus-driven process, they developed a set of recommendations in 2015. The idea was they would take these recommendations on how water could be managed within the ACF River Basin and take these recommendations to the three states, as well as different federal agencies, and try to see if they could, again, figure out a more equitable way of sharing water. But unfortunately, you may remember the timeline, which because I said there wasn't a task, we don't have to. But the recommendations came out in 2015, which was right after that US Supreme Court case started. And so none of the states were willing to really talk about water with anybody else because they were involved in this. Florida and Georgia, that is. And so a lot of the work that the ACS stakeholders have done, it just kind of stalled out. Nonetheless, the members of the ACS stakeholders have continued to meet, and we've continued to kind of invest and engage in different projects. One I have here, this drought dashboard project. Members of the ACS stakeholders worked with the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration and some other federal agencies, as well as lots of other stakeholders at the state level government, to develop what we call as a drought dashboard project. And one of our big concerns has always been that when it's raining, there's plenty of water in these Staff River basins. It's just that when there's a drought, that's when we have problems. And so this drought dashboard was kind of put together. It's a technical piece for decision makers who are trying to decide how they should be managing water as a drought develops, and then how they can think about managing that water while we're in a drought. And so there's all these different tools for state climatologists to use and other state and federal partners, as well as conservation groups like our own, as we're trying to gauge and kind of keep tabs on drought conditions as they develop. So like I said, the ACS stakeholders are still working together. We are still meeting and we are still working on projects, but the recommendations that came out in 2015, many of them are still applicable and relevant, and we will hopefully have some success with pushing some of those forward in the future. So what can we do to make the Chattahoochee River sustainable? Among the things that I do is I look at a lot of policy when it comes to water conservation and efficiency. And so the report that you see pictured here on the left, Filling the Water Gap, this is something that we put together to kind of highlight water conservation practices that are effective in urban and residential situations. So things like having water efficient appliances and toilets and other kind of household devices like that. That is an easy way for individuals to think about the amount of water that they use. But it also dives into policy and other kind of suggested changes, like implementing plumbing code, making plumbing codes more targeted towards water efficiency and conservation. On the right side, again, we're thinking about the millions of people that live in residential situations is one way to think about how to address water conservation and efficiency. But on the right, again, agriculture, one of the largest water consumers in the state, one of the biggest businesses. The report on the right was something that I put together in partnership with the Water Coalition to address where we find more water conservation and efficiency in agriculture as an industry itself, specifically when it comes to crops and animal feeding and whatnot. But again, these are just kind of some examples of the work we have done to address water use in a couple different sectors. And then that is it. Again, work that we do, we want to make sure there's enough water in the Chattahoochee River for all the folks who need it, the communities, the businesses, the industry, and then certainly all the critters and whatnot. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take your questions. And if you want to learn more, just visit us at chattahoochee.org. And in a shameless plug, Henry had mentioned the book that I worked on and wrote, and that is an image of the cover about kind of the history of water management in the Southeast and where all of the lakes like West Point came from. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I was told by somebody in Peachtree City, we don't have enough water to continue developing, but yet we're still developing, and we're just gonna run out of water. There was someone in government there. Is that valid, and can you put a cap on the town and say, hey, you can't get any liquor, you're not gonna have any water? How does that work?
I can't speak specifically to Peachtree City in that example. what I can tell you is that we can get more water. And it's not necessarily that we have to build more reservoirs to get it. That is one of that report that I put up there, Filling the Water Gap. It kind of gets at all the different things that we can do to take the water and the water sources that we already have and use them more effectively and more efficiently. And so there are a variety of ways to get to additional water supply without actually having to build additional supply. One thing, just for the sake of example, at one point there was a lot of talk in the state about building reservoirs, small reservoirs all over the state, and it was justified on population growth. Most of that population growth, those projections were ultimately determined to not be very reliable, and so that's why a lot of the reservoir plans actually kind of all went dormant, if you will. And then just again for another example, there's been conversation about raising the elevation of reservoirs, Lake Lanier up in the headwaters, and even West Point and some of the others, and that is one way to also get to more actual volume in perhaps a more economic and efficient way. So that's just a couple of examples of how we can get to more water.
So Metro Atlanta has sent us millions of water bottles and tennis balls. And I know that Henry has shared with us some trash traps that have been installed around here locally. And I was wondering what else is being done upstream to help prevent all the trash that we see and receive.
Well, we've got trash traps down here, we've got a lot of trash traps up there, so we are working with some local governments up there in the Atlanta region to try to capture some of that. Also, Chattanooga River, we're also meeting with Sweet the Gooch on an annual basis, and we try to get as much as we can. We usually able to pull about 50 million tons or so of garbage out of Chattanooga River itself on a regular basis. One way, maybe we wouldn't get the tennis balls, but it might get the water bottles, is, it would make sense to do any kind of recycling program that requires deposits on bottles, or ways to influence policies to encourage reusable materials. So there are potentially other tools on dealing with single-use plastic materials to try to reduce those particular items by getting out into the world, if you will.
I think, yeah, to your point, or to your question more so, I feel like you have people like myself and some of my other colleagues who are kind of working day to day on the ground, leading trash cleanups. Or, we've got 7 trash traps in the Metro Atlanta area that are all collecting 100, 200 pounds of trash every week or every month. But then, yeah, for me, it's reassuring that we have people like Chris who are working on like the big picture of 30,000 feet kind of solutions to, can we get companies to reduce their use of single-use plastics or recycling programs? So that's my addition to that.
And I will say too, Atlanta did ban all the single-use plastics in all government facilities about a year and a half ago, which also includes the air. This is a lot of single-use plastics.
Hopefully we're on the right track.
Yeah, this is one of those things that's going to take a while.
Another water-related issue that we experienced earlier in this year was a paper, a report provided here to us about the dams in Georgia. And Henry will recall the details of that much easier than I. I wanted to ask if you know whether the proposed actions to improve so many of the old dams, small dams, private dams is now on track, and if that will maybe have an effect also in improving the availability of water.
Was there something specific that you were?
That was Sarah Gottlieb who spoke
Okay.
about that.
There is a lot of federal money now available through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that was passed early this year. That will be available for some level of dam safety and potentially for dam removal. So my understanding is that there is some federal money that will be coming down. Question again is then how it actually gets used. And when you're dealing with private structures, the entity who owns the structure has to make a decision that they want to proceed with either removal or some level of maintenance. And then, I mean, certainly, I mean, from the perspective of the river, I mean, there's also Georgia Power downstream is talking about removing, 2-3 dams between, down in the valley. And that project is moving along very well from the perspective of that those dams will likely be coming down in the next year. Well, not this year, but probably beginning next year. They'll probably begin actual removal of those structures. And it will be, sounds like it will kind of take place and kind of over time. They're not all going to come down at the exact same time. It'll be kind of scheduled, if you will.
So what will the river look like down there? I can't picture what it looks like.
Honestly, I can't either. What makes it, well, I mean, I think at a basic level, with the dams removed, it will look like a consecutive set of shoals. And they're, with some relief. I don't want to say waterfalls, but I mean, it's going to be very shoaly. It will also be how much water is there will be determined on West Point releases. But that is, it will look, for all intents and purposes, like a natural stream, but also a regulated flow.
Well, back in the day, Atlanta was getting humongous fines every day for their sewage spilling into the Chattahoochee. Have they largely remedied that situation?
Yes. Yes, and I would just say that a couple examples of how that has been remedied and the success of it is that the water is cleaner when you look at it from a water quality perspective than it has been very, very good. Second, there's now interest in all sorts of different types of residential and commercial development along the river. Below the city of Atlanta, again, we're starting. When real estate investors are interested in building apartments on the river, that's a signal that things are changing. And then the third thing I would say is, in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the state environmental agency had an unofficial policy that they would never issue a raw water withdrawal for a city. So if a city or county downstream of Atlanta but upstream of West Point said they wanted a water withdrawal from the Chattahoochee River, the state's unofficial policy was no way. And as a sign of where things are today, they've issued one water withdrawal permit for some communities south of Atlanta, and I know Coweta County is interested in one as well. So that's 2 drinking water withdrawals in a section of river that the state never would have issued for back in the days. Any other questions?
That's fascinating, Chris. I can listen to you talk about the river all day long. I appreciate all of y'all's work that you do to keep it clean. I talk to Henry about this a lot. How I grew up in Atlanta and know the difference of the water above the Grange and in the Grange. You can tell a huge difference since y'all have been really attacking it. So thank you for the work you're doing. Keep it up, keep it cleaner down here. In honor of you speaking today, we're going to make a donation to Polio Plus, which is Rotary's initiative to rid the world of polio. We thank you for being here. Reminder that next week our program will be Jackie Kennedy and John Calloway. They're going to be talking about their new book on the history of cattle farming in Georgia. And then a reminder that we have a board meeting immediately following this right next week. We're adjourned. Thanks.
Yeah.